Right now, I am in Twin Falls, Idaho, and sitting next to me is my lovely paternal grandmother. Would you like to introduce yourself?
I am Janet Sue Miller Nelson,
Oh, well, the full name, very nice.
and I was born in December 23, 1942, in Salina, Oklahoma.
Oh, yes, very nice. So, you were born in Oklahoma, but then you pretty shortly moved out to Boron, California, which is in Southern California. It's in the desert. Um, and there is a large borax mine, which is
Yes.
why there's a town there out in the middle of the Mojave Desert, one of the hottest places on Earth. And how old were you when you moved out to Boron?
Probably about 3.
Oh, so you moved there almost just right after the end of World War II.
Yeah.
And your parents, where were your parents from and how did they meet?
My dad was from Illinois, and my mom was from Oklahoma. And they met in Missouri at a Bethel dam that was being built. My mom was helping her sister cook for these men, and they met, and then they got married.
Oh, very nice. And do you know how many brothers and sisters do you have?
I have 3 brothers and 3 sisters.
And which one are you? Like which?
I'm next to the youngest.
Oh, so you're the second youngest.
Yeah.
Ah, wow. So your parents got married, and then they spent a while in Salina, Oklahoma. So that would be northeast Oklahoma. Salina. So that would be northeast Oklahoma.
Yeah.
And they spent a while there. And then shortly after you were born, and then well, shortly after the last child was born, that's when they moved to Boron. And what was the reason why your family chose to move out to Boron from northeast Oklahoma?
My dad had asthma really bad, and the doctor told him to move to a drier climate.
And what was growing up in Boron, California? It's a very small town. It still exists. What was growing up in Boron, California like? What was your home like? What was elementary school like? High school like?
Yeah, it was wonderful. No pressure. We had fun. We had a good life. And I didn't go to kindergarten because it didn't start until the year after. And I went to grade school up through the 8th grade, and then I had to be bused over to Edwards Air Force Base to finish my high school.
And what was your home like? Did you have electricity? Did you have running water? How big was the house?
It had 2 bedrooms, a living room and kitchen combined, and then it had a little kitchen, and let's see, we didn't have running water. We did not have electricity. We did not have gas. We heated with a wood stove.
Yeah, and I think that if you're watching this, it's the 21st century now, the 2020s, and so if you're watching this, it might be kind of surprising to learn that there were many middle-class Americans in the 40s, 50s, even into the 60s who were growing up in houses that, they didn't have running water, they didn't have electricity, they didn't have gas. The United States has been a wealthy country for a long time, but we forget that humanity has been progressing a lot in recent generations. And so even wealthy countries like the United States, 60, 70, 80, 90 years ago, there were a lot of people who, grew up in a much more, you might say old-fashioned, close to the earth type way. Do you know how many people lived in the kind of the Boron area? Like if you were to draw a circle, let's say a 25, 30-mile radius around where you
Oh, I have no clue. Probably maybe 200-300.
Oh,
Because
really?
a lot of them moved out to North Edwards and Desert Lake, and we didn't have a bathroom. We had an outhouse,
Oh, wow.
and we had a shower house, but it was outside.
And was everyone who lived in that area, everyone was employed at either the Boron mine or the Air Force Base?
Yeah, pretty much. Very few was employed in the town of Boron, mostly the mines.
Was the mine unionized? Like, did they ever go on strike? And
Definitely.
Okay.
But I got out of there before that. I moved up to Idaho. Yes, they went on strike.
And strikes, were they pretty nasty, pretty
Yes,
aggressive?
I heard they were.
Ah, yeah. It's so fascinating because, you know, when I talk to older Americans, generations ago, many Americans were in a union. And now the percentage of Americans who work in the private sector, which is what, you know, the boron mine was, the private sector, or the borax mine, excuse me. At the borax mine, you know, back in the day, generations ago, the percentage of people in the private sector who were unionized was like 60, 70%. It was wild, the percentage. But now, I think it's down to like 6, 7%. Private sector unionization is very rare. And so it's kind of heartwarming and kind of a callback to years gone by when we learn about a time when there were, you know, people were in unions and they would strike, and because that doesn't really happen so much anymore. We don't live in as much of a pro-worker country as we used to.
They got nasty and mean.
Would the borax mine like bring in scabs? Would they bring in people to maybe beat up the strikers?
Yep, scabs they called them.
Wow.
And but it paid good.
Mm-hmm. And then you, after growing up there in the Mojave Desert and Boron, you then moved up here to southern Idaho?
Yes, I came up to go to business college, and I started, and then I got married in June.
So did you have any connection up here? Why did you choose to come
My
up to Twin Falls?
sister married an Air Force guy, because lots of Air Force bases around us. She married one, moved up here, and I moved up with her later.
Oh, I see. So your sister married someone who was in the Air Force in Southern California,
Yes,
and then he was transferred up here.
No, he was from Twin
Oh,
Falls.
he was. So he wanted to return back here.
Yeah.
Oh, I see.
He was stationed at Mockingbird Hill.
And how old were you when you came here to Southern Idaho?
Oh, yeah, probably about 19.
19. Do you remember what year it was?
About 62 or 63.
Oh, 63. So this is 63. I've heard from people who lived through the 60s that the early 60s were like the 50s. It was still a very traditional conservative country.
Yes.
And it really wasn't until the very end of the 60s, like 67, 68, 69, that's when we saw like, you know, the hippies and the protests and the cultural changes and the, you know, experimenting with drugs and like the new forms of lifestyles.
But they were all down in the Los Angeles area.
Yeah.
We didn't have the drugs where I lived.
So you didn't. So there wasn't kind of like a flower power hippie thing going on. So they would just stick out the thumb and say, "Give me to California, so I can put on the flowers and do whatever, you know, play guitar or whatever they did in the late 60s." Okay, that's interesting. And you got married very shortly after coming here to Twin Falls.
Yeah, probably. I got married in June, and I'm still here.
So how did you meet your husband?
At a Thanksgiving dinner at my brother-in-law's family.
Oh, and then you had my father, and then my uncle, my father's brother. You had both of them pretty quickly after
Yeah.
you got married.
Yeah, right smack. They were really close.
And then, like, I was 5, 6 years after your second child, you had your daughter.
Yeah.
Wow, very cool. And then what did my grandfather? He passed away. What year was it? Do you remember what year he passed away?
1960.
No, no,
No.
no, your not your
No.
your husband, my grandfather.
Oh, what year did he die?
Was it? I forget exactly. I was
It was 2012.
2012.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Yeah. So I was on the cusp of adulthood at that point. Yeah, I remember I did come out for the funeral,
Yeah.
and he died of cancer,
Yes.
and it was related, believed to be related. He smoked a lot, so it's very common for people. Almost everybody smoked back in the day, and so a lot of people who grew up in the 40s, 50s, 60s, a lot of them have now contracted cancer or died. Sure that probably if you're watching this, maybe somebody in your family who's older maybe has had this issue. But you didn't smoke,
No.
so you're still here.
No. I didn't like the smell. It stinks.
It's true. And what did my grandfather? What did he do for work?
He was his dad owned a truck line, and he worked for him. But the truck line went. What do you call it?
Bankrupt.
Yeah, that's it.
Because he wasn't paying his taxes, and then the government seized it all.
Something was wrong, and then he was become a salesman, and he was a very, very good salesman.
And he was a salesman at where?
Sears for 26 years.
Oh, yes. And for those watching, Sears, I think there's a few Sears stores still around, but back in the day, Sears was a really big deal. It was like Walmart plus, it was like all of the major stores combined. I mean, the tallest building in the United States for a long time, I do believe, was the Sears Tower in Chicago.
Yes.
But now it's been renamed to the Willis Tower. I mean, what Willis? What is Willis? They renamed it Willis because Sears just collapsed. It just went away. They weren't able to adapt to changing trends, and they kind of became a dinosaur. And at the end, you would go into these Sears stores, and there would be large portions of the shelves that weren't stocked. There would, it was kind of chaos, and now they've just kind of faded away. I think they still exist, but it's just not the presence that they used to be.
No, it used to be a main store, and at 3 levels downtown. And then after he didn't work there anymore, he went to furniture, and he was a good salesman.
And my grandfather, so you were a stay-at-home mother, right? And then
pretty much.
And then my grandfather, so he was the sole income earner, and yet you guys were able to have a house, and you owned it. You didn't have a mortgage. You had 2 cars, right?
Yeah.
2 cars. You had didn't you guys have like an RV too? And you had an RV, and you'd go on vacation. You'd go to Tijuana, and Tijuana was much more kind of in vogue to visit back in the day. You would travel around the West and camp. I mean, you had a real middle class, a solid middle class lifestyle, just with 1 income earner, no college degree, and he was just a salesman I mean, because to a young person, this is unimaginable. I mean, working as a salesman at a major retailer and being able to support a family, a wife, 3 kids, RV, 2 cars, house you own outright on the land you own. I mean, this is unimaginable to people of this generation. It's crazy how this country has changed.
I was a very good budgeter, and we ate at home. We didn't eat out.
That's true. Yeah, restaurant culture is something that is kind of recent. Yeah. I've heard from older people that restaurants didn't really start to become a thing until kind of like the 90s. Because it used to be people would like eat at home and very rarely go to restaurants.
Very rarely. We got to go on birthdays.
And so let's see here. So what's something good to talk about? What was you've seen a lot of you've been here on Earth for a long time. You've seen the country change. You've seen the world change. What are some things that you've noticed? What are some changes that are different from, say, the the 50s and the 60s and the 70s,
Yes.
and now in the 2020s, the 2010s? What are some of the differences
I
you've noticed?
think I've seen a drastic change. The country has become lawless, and they have forgotten God, and it's just the things that are accepted are not pleasing to the Lord.
When you were growing up, and you were a young woman, was there any like significant population of non-Christians in either Southern California or here in Southern Idaho?
Of course, yeah.
Oh.
There was a lot of, where in the little mining town, there was a Catholic church, a Baptist church, and then two others. And then I went to a Pentecostal church.
Oh yes, but I mean, for example, we were driving today in Twin Falls, and I went to church with my other grandmother today, and her church is right next, almost across the street from a mosque, which is, I think that would be kind of surprising to people to think that there's a mosque here in what is a somewhat small town. In Southern Idaho, there's a mosque. I mean, at least one, maybe more. I mean, did you ever see a mosque growing up? Ever?
Never.
Yeah, it's
never.
And what were the population like? Was it mostly just Americans, or were there were some Mexicans too?
They were Americans, but the Mexicans would come in on a work order and stay out at that camp and work. Then they'd take their money and go back home.
Oh, interesting. So they were. So the Mexican community was pretty much all seasonal agricultural workers. They would come in, set up camp, bring in the harvest, make some money, and then they would head back to Mexico, where life is cheaper and maybe they didn't have to work for most of the year.
That's true.
But things now obviously have totally changed. I mean, if you go to Twin Falls is the center of a refugee resettlement thing. I have if you talk to people who work in the school system here, they have something like, they translate everything into like 35 different languages. I mean, it's a radical transformation in one lifetime. And I mean, it's amazing to think that the Mexicans, Mexico is right, our southern border, they have a very special relationship with us. There's been a large Mexican community in the U.S. for a very long time.
Yeah.
But even they were still seasonal when you were a young person. They still had not even permanently settled yet.
There was a few families, but not like what we see now.
So when did non-Americans start settling in significant numbers here in Southern Idaho?
Boy, I don't know.
Was it like the late 80s or maybe the early 90s? Because I know Ronald Reagan brought in a lot of people.
Yeah, I don't have any idea.
Okay. But at one point it was all Americans, and then at some point over the decades it radically changed.
Yeah.
Wow. And what about something that a lot of young people talk about is climate change. Do you? I mean, you've seen the climate change. Do you feel that it's got hotter? Do you feel that it's got drier, or
No.
Anything?
No. I don't. I think climate comes and goes.
Oh, okay.
And we don't control the thermostat. God does.
Well, that's true. But I have talked to some older folks out here who do say that the winters are a little bit warmer than they used to be. That there's less snow than there used to be.
Well, it's every so many years we get lots of snow. This year we got lots and lots of rain. Oh.
Interesting. Okay. And is there like, how strong is the Mormon community in this region? When you moved here, was the Mormon community already very established, or have they come here more recently?
There was Mormons, but now there's a lot.
Because I think, like, if you look at a demographic or religious map of Idaho, what you'll notice is that Idaho, I think, it's now like 35% Mormon, something like that. And the southeast corner of Idaho is almost exclusively Mormon. Idaho Falls, Pocatello, Rexburg, the host of BYU Idaho. But historically, the Mormon percentage of the population here in Idaho was smaller. But as the decades have gone on and Protestant and Catholic Americans have started having fewer children, whereas the Mormon birth rate has stayed higher than the Protestant and Catholic birth rate, the Mormon community has grown in Idaho. And so kind of the frontiers of Mormondom, you might say, have started expanding outwards from southeast Idaho into places that they traditionally did not have a really sizable presence in, like here in Twin Falls. Like historically, the kind of Mormondom was maybe like, maybe 100 miles east of here. That was kind of the boundary.
Yeah.
But now they have a temple here now. I actually toured the temple when they first opened it. And that was like 15 years ago or something when they opened the first temple. So.
I can't remember.
Yeah.
Because I didn't. They had an open house, but I didn't go to it.
And did you grow up religious? Were both of your parents?
My mother took us to church.
What type of church? What denomination?
It was Pentecostal.
Oh, Pentecostal church.
It was a non-denomination.
Oh, so non-denominational, but kind of a Pentecostal orientation.
And they loved God.
And was your father religious?
No.
No.
He didn't go.
Okay. And not even at the end of his life? Sometimes as men get older, they become more spiritual.
Yeah, he kind of did.
Okay.
He went to the Seventh-day Adventist, and he liked it really well.
Oh yes, I'm familiar with them. Yeah, they go to like church on Saturdays, because they try to like kind of retain some kind of traditional Jewish culture and practices, like having Sabbath on the end of Friday and going into Saturday, as opposed to Sunday, which is what all the other Christians do.
And they're real help,
Yes.
They push being healthy.
Yeah, they have a very long life expectancy,
Yeah.
which is interesting. Some of the oldest communities in the United States are Seventh-day Adventist communities because they're very active. They like exercise.
Yeah.
So, wow. And here in Twin Falls, it was a pretty small town when you moved here, would you say?
Yes.
Do you know how many people lived in the area when you moved here?
I don't. You'd have to look on that.
But it was
there
small.
was a 2-lane highway that went on Blue Lakes.
Mm-hmm.
And now look at it.
And now the Twin Falls metro area, I think I looked it up the other day, I think it's like 115,000 people, 120,000 people. I mean, it's huge. Giant Walmart, Costco, and highways and traffic. I mean, it's really growing. I mean, it didn't just stay like a little farm town. It has turned into a kind of a regional center, which is kind of fascinating. I guess probably a lot of people are brought in through the refugee program, and maybe they kind of establish themselves, learn a little bit of English, maybe make a little money, and then maybe they leave the Twin Falls area and move to somewhere with a little more opportunity, like maybe Boise or Seattle or something, and then kind of a new fresh wave of Somalis or Burmese are brought in, and because originally it was the Vietnamese, right? I think the very first refugees were the Vietnamese, because the United States made the choice to invade Vietnam and become involved in that conflict, and so there was a lot of refugees, and so this kind of this policy of, it's been described of invade the world, invite the world. Kind of it's something that's really never occurred before in human history, where the United States is like, we're going to invade Vietnam, we're going to destroy the country, millions of people dead, but then we're also going to accept huge numbers of Vietnamese, we're going to bring them across, the Pacific Ocean can fit every continent on Earth inside of it, and we're going to bring we're going to wage war against Vietnam. We're going to destroy Vietnam. We're going to not allow the Vietnamese to pursue their own government and their own destiny. But we're also going to bring in huge numbers of Vietnamese to like a small town in southern Idaho. I mean, it's just very, very strange. It's very, very unprecedented in human history. We live in fascinating times in that way.
Yeah.
But now the Vietnamese, they have kind of integrated, and so they've kind of left the area, and now you have new people coming in. You know, I hear, when I travel around Twin Falls, I hear Somali, I hear, Haitian Creole, I hear, lots of different languages, Arabic, lots of different languages from around the world. It's really quite fascinating. I mean, you even hear a little bit of, Nahuatl, which is, I believe, the indigenous kind of Aztec or Mexica language of central Mexico. So you'll even be Mexicans who don't speak Spanish natively. They instead speak Nahuatl natively, or Mayan, one of the varieties of Mayan natively. I mean, it's really fascinating. Wow. So, you've seen the country become much less Christian, right? I mean, like when you were growing up, everyone kind of knew what was right and wrong.
Yeah.
Like there was no question. There was no, moral relativism, or like, that's your truth and this is my truth, or, well, that's okay for you, but that's not okay. Like when you were growing up, it was like Christian morals,
Yeah.
Christian, ethics.
Absolutely.
That's for everyone. And this wasn't questioned. And when you would turn on the television, they accepted Christian morality. When you listened to government officials, they had a single cohesive moral view of the world. The people around you, you didn't have to walk on eggshells because everyone kind of had the same moral and theological understanding of the world. Would you say? Like, do you remember the first time you met someone who was like, I'm an atheist, and I've never been Christian, or I'm a Buddhist, or do you remember the first time you met someone who wasn't Christian?
No, in our small town, we didn't have that.
Yeah, because you would have people who didn't necessarily like go to church, like say your father. He didn't go to church as much until later in life, but he wasn't like a militant anti-Christian. He was just like, I just don't want to go to church as much. But he wasn't like a militant anti-Christian.
No.
He didn't identify as atheist or agnostic.
He became a Christian
Yeah.
kind of at the end.
Yeah. And so you were born after the Great Depression ended. The war economy kind of brought the economy back with World War II. But when you're speaking to your siblings, were they able to experience some of the poverty and the desperation of the 30s and stuff with the Great Depression?
No.
So they were too young to really remember it.
Yeah.
As well. But did you ever speak with your parents about what life was like in the 20s and 30s with the? No,
my
not really.
parents never told us anything.
Because I know that I've seen pictures. There used to be a lot of slums. We called them Hoover towns because the president was Herbert Hoover at the time. There used to be a lot of slums in the United States during the Great Depression. So it's kind of interesting if you Google Hoover Town, you can see, like Central Park used to be covered in a slum from, people who had lost their job and were destitute. But the Hoover towns were then demolished under FDR when the U.S. was trying to move out of the Great Depression. And so now they don't, but now we're kind of moving into a new economy where maybe we're going to start seeing the emergence of slums. Because right now we have a lot of homeless people, but they kind of hang out in downtowns, they sleep on sidewalks. But, we might get to the point where we start to establish legitimate slums like exist in Latin America, where it's a set-aside place where people can, get corrugated metal or wood or twine, and they can, build structures as opposed to sleeping on the sidewalk, or stuff as we do now. So it might be interesting. Everything that is old will become, new again. We'll have Hoover towns once again, but we'll see. Well, let's see. What other interesting things are there to talk about? The passage of time is a really amazing thing. Have you ever? Let's see. a little background noise there as I am having dead air as I'm trying to think of some more things to talk about. But I think we've covered a lot of things. We've covered your childhood.
Yes.
We covered you moving here. Your marriage, your children. How many grandchildren do you have now? Let's see. There's me, my sister. So that's 2. Then there's 3 more, 5. So and then there's 2 more, 7. So with 7, you have 7 grandchildren.
Yeah, and there's 2 step grandchildren.
That's right. And then you also have a number of great grandchildren now.
4.
Yeah, so 4 great grandchildren, 7 children, or 7 grandchildren, 4 great grandchildren, and then 2 step grandchildren.
Yeah.
That's pretty amazing.
No, they're 2 step grandchildren.
And the birth rate has kind of collapsed nowadays. Nobody has kids anymore, at least not like, heritage Americans don't really have children that much anymore. And we have kind of live in an anti-child culture. I live in a big city. I've lived in big cities pretty much my whole life. And I don't see a lot of children when I'm in the big city. But back in the day, it was much more of a pro-natal, pro-family culture, right? Like you would see families and children like all over, and it was just normal.
Yeah.
Like you get married, you have kids, like it was just normal, and nobody thought it was like, because nowadays people have a lot of anxiety about it, like, oh my gosh, I need to be a millionaire before I have children. But back then, people were like, well, children are a blessing. Let's have them as soon as we get married, and the Lord will provide. Maybe we're not millionaires, but we'll figure it out.
Yeah. They want to bring all these people in, and yet they want to abort the babies, and that's disgusting.
Yeah. Was abortion a thing that much when
I
you were
never
growing up?
heard of it.
Yeah.
Never. I was pretty sheltered. Never ever heard of abortion.
Well, I mean, they only introduced birth control in 1965. Was that when the pill was first introduced? I mean, it was pretty recently. Yeah. So I mean, in abortion, I guess abortion probably wouldn't have been much of a thing until the creation of the abortion pill, which I don't know when that was, maybe the 80s or the 90s. That made it more accessible to the general population. But prior to that, it wasn't heard of, right?
No.
Yeah, wow, fascinating.
No, I was very, very sheltered. I didn't hear of all this garbage.
And when we were traveling around the RV, where are some places you would go? California, here. Where are some other places you like to go?
California, Tijuana, Mexico, 1 year to Canada, and we went camping up at Redfish.
Oh, yeah, very nice. And when you would go to California, nowadays California is like 41 million people. You want to get from one side of LA to the other, it takes you 4.5 hours fighting through traffic. And a huge swath of California cannot speak English. It's very exotic, very foreign. I go to California and I am a very visible exotic minority in many parts of California. It feels almost like a foreign country sometimes. But when you would go to California back in the day, did it feel like it was another country?
No.
No. And people spoke English. They were American.
Yes.
But it was just Americans in California.
Yeah.
It was the sunshine. It was the beach.
Yeah.
And then it was Americana.
Yeah, there was no foreign people in our school. And when I went to high school, the Edwards Air Force Base had a lot of, black people and that were in the Air Force.
Okay.
So, but we never dealt with it.
Yes, because this was prior. When did you graduate high school again?
1960.
Okay, so this was prior to desegregation.
And I was 17.
Yeah, so they would have had their own schools because of segregation at that time. I mean, I know that some states started to desegregate before the civil rights era and the Supreme Court rulings of the late 60s and mid 60s. But people underestimate how conservative California was. I do believe that California did not desegregate until just a few years before the Supreme Court rulings said, if you do not desegregate, the federal government is going to send in, like they did in, Mississippi and Arkansas and stuff. They sent in huge numbers of soldiers and said, like, you're going to desegregate.
The Borax mines didn't hire black people. They had a few Mexican, but the government said they had to hire so many.
Oh, so after this things changed, the government steps in and forces them.
That was after I left.
Oh, interesting. Wow. And wow. But you did have a friend growing up named Tishikoto, right?
Yeah.
And she was Japanese.
Yes.
Well, you met her after you moved here
Yes.
So you would have been a young woman.
Yes. I met her at church.
But so you did know one of the kind of the only non-Americans.
Yeah.
But she had been put into a internment camp.
Yeah. They were from Portland, but they put all the Japanese in intern.
Yes, internment camps.
Yeah.
And this was in Eastern Oregon, right? No, this was in Idaho.
Portland. That hunt where they put them is out by Eden.
And because I know that, like, back in the day when they were building these internment camps, they wanted to put them in kind of the middle of nowhere. So that probably was why they chose that particular location. And then I imagine her family, after they leave the internment camp, the war is concluded, they decide to stay in the southern Idaho area. And did you ever talk with her? Did she experience anti-Japanese discrimination as a result of after because I know that immediately after the war there was still some anger against Japan.
Well, I wasn't around.
Okay.
Because she went to church and they were Christians. Nobody ever, put her down.
Were they always Christians? Did they convert? How do you know when they converted?
She was in a TB sanitarium in Gooding because she got TB. She thinks she contacted it. They always have restaurants. She thought that's where she got it. And she was quarantined at Gooding. And that's where she became a Christian.
Oh, did
a lady there introduced her to the Lord.
Do you know if her family converted to
her
Christianity
son and daughter-in-law are very much a Christian. Her husband, to my knowledge, never did.
Okay, yeah, because I know the Japanese people in Japan, they are, I believe, a syncretic mix of Buddhism and Shintoism. I mean, fact check me on this, but I believe, the Buddhism originates out of India and then it moves into Eastern Asia where it has much more kind of relevancy or popularity within kind of their society. India was not as receptive to Buddhism because of their kind of unique culture and stuff, but Eastern Asia was more egalitarian, and so Buddhism was much more attractive to kind of Southeast Asia, China, Korea, Japan, and so Buddhism comes into Japan, but then also there's Shintoism, and then Shintoism is the ethnic religion of the Japanese people. Only Japanese people are Shinto, and it is kind of it's kind of like a worship of the emperor, but also there's an element of ancestor worship and worship of nature. I'm not an expert on Shintoism, but yeah, I think they would mix. Like traditionally, all Japanese people are both Buddhist and Shinto, I think. But then she chose, once she came to the U.S., she said, I want to adopt Christianity.
Yeah, and she was a very good Christian.
And didn't they own a Japanese restaurant on Main Street?
They called it a Chinese restaurant.
Oh, because of that time. Well, why did they call it Chinese? Why did they choose Chinese and not Japanese? Yeah.
I don't know.
Was it maybe just that Americans were more familiar with Chinese food than Japanese food?
Oh, it was good. Yeah, they were Japanese, but they opened a Chinese restaurant.
Wow, that's funny. It still exists, doesn't it? No, it doesn't exist.
No.
But but the
No.
building still exists. It's just been
Yeah.
turned into something else.
Yeah, it's right in the corner of Shoshone and,
Oh, we don't have to know the
Yeah.
exact location.
yeah,
Wow. Okay. And
about through.
almost. And so, do you feel like being here in Twin Falls? You've been here for many decades. Does it still feel very much like home to you, or do you sometimes you go to the Walmart or the Costco and there's just so many people
Yeah,
and it's just,
no.
does it sometimes feel a little foreign to you?
No, it's too many people.
Oh. So do you kind of feel like you didn't move, but it was changed?
Yeah.
You didn't change, you didn't
Yeah.
move, but the area around you was changed. That's kind of
Yeah,
interesting.
it changed a lot.
Wow.
That,
All right. Well, I think that pretty much wraps it up. We don't want to keep going on. I'm sure we could go on and on and on forever, but
yeah,
we'll have to, close at some point. So I think this is probably a good place to
Yeah.
close. Is there anything else you'd like to talk about before
No.
we end?
no,
All right. Well, fair enough. All right. Well, ladies and gentlemen, my beautiful, lovely grandmother. Such a wonderful, opportunity to be able to speak with you and hear your story and hear about how the country has changed and how you've perceived that change. Hopefully, I think that we should be respectful towards our elders, towards those who have gone before us, and we should learn from the past. And we should learn so that we can, because it's not good to live in the eternal present. We should know where we came from, and we should know what things were like before us. And I think that a lot of young people these days don't have an appreciation for their grandparents, for how things have changed, how things were before. So I think it's good to have these types of conversations, and I hope that if you're watching, you have this type of conversation with your grandparents, as well. All right. Well, from beautiful southern Idaho, I think from Twin Falls, Magic Valley, where when the first explorers were coming through, they said, "Surely nothing will ever grow here," but the wonders of modern irrigation, and here we are.
yes.
And so, all right, from beautiful, wonderful Twin Falls, Idaho, au revoir, and thank you very much.
You're welcome.